Welcome to Moving People Forward with Mark Elfstrand. This program is a series of conversations on commonly seen challenges in everyday people's lives. We hope you'll be inspired by the stories you hear today. Perhaps you know of someone who would also benefit. Be sure to share the program link with a friend. Now, here's Mark.
He was a young Jewish boy growing up in New York, and his faith at the age of 13 led him to become a bar mitzvah in the Orthodox tradition. He distanced himself in those younger years from so-called Christians because, well, frankly, he just didn't trust them. As he traveled across the country, though, in the early 1970s, my guest met some Gentile Christians who gave him a new perspective about Yeshua, and his life has never been the same since. With me today on Moving People Forward is Roy Schwarcz, Midwest Regional Director for Chosen People Ministries and a respected Bible teacher in a variety of Messianic circles. Roy, welcome, and good to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's good to be with you, Mark.
So let's talk about Chosen People Ministries. What exactly do you do?
Well, in 1894, a rabbi came to faith in Jesus and began sharing the gospel among his kinsmen in Brooklyn and in Lower Manhattan. And that was the beginning of our organization, which is now the largest ministry reaching Jewish people with the gospel around the world. And so our job is to, by various means, communicate the good news that Yeshua, Jesus, is the Messiah, and toward that we plant congregations, we do street work, we do campus ministry, we send people in with Israelis who are on backpacking trips and so on. So all kinds of different ways we communicate the gospel to Jewish people.
So I mentioned at the onset there that you were raised in, it sounds like a very Jewish home, a practicing Jewish home?
No, not really. I was bar mitzvahed in the Orthodox tradition because it was the least expensive synagogue in town. My parents wanted my bar mitzvah to be wholesale rather than retail.
I see.
And so that's why I was bar mitzvahed in that tradition. But my parents, neither one of them were very religious.
So what was it like as a young guy growing up in New York?
Well, everybody was Jewish where I grew up. If you were not Jewish, you were the unusual one. And so it was felt like we were among friends and relatives and so on.
Your parents both immigrated to this country, right?
My grandfather immigrated.
Okay.
On my father's side. He was brought over by Strauss, who owned Macy's, to develop and create their cabinets for display cases.
Okay.
And my mother, with her father and family, came over in 1934 after he had read Mein Kampf. And so he knew that the writing was on the wall, and so he quickly got the family out and came to America.
Okay, so also I mentioned in the introduction that so as a young guy, you'd hear this word Christian. Just kind of give us a response as to how that played out in your mind.
Well, it was in the shadow of the Holocaust, so we felt that Christians were responsible for that, and throughout history, Christians were the biggest problems that we as Jews experienced. The Crusades, the Inquisitions, the pogroms of Eastern Europe and so on, Russia. And so, Christianity is just not healthy for us.
All right, so at the tender age of, what was it, you were in your early 20s when you decided to make that trip across country?
Right, that was what everybody was doing.
Sure.
The promised land was the West Coast if you were a New Yorker.
And you were a hip guy anyway.
Well, yeah, or at least I thought I was. I was more of a rebel without a clue.
Okay.
And so I was traveling cross country and managed to hit a small town in Wisconsin, La Crosse, Wisconsin. And, I met these Jesus people, and they started telling me I needed Jesus, and, sharing from the New Testament where this was so. And finally, my last argument was, I'm Jewish. Because we Jews love to argue. It's part of it's on our gene pool. And so they said, you're Jewish. Well, our Messiah is Jewish. Our Bible's Jewish. If it weren't for the Jewish people, we wouldn't have a Bible or a Messiah. And I never had a response like that. And they began sharing about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were on a first-name basis with my people. And I thought, what are these Gentiles doing with my God?
Right.
And they said, you ask the God of Israel if Jesus isn't the Messiah. So I said, all right. And I did, and things started happening. I saw the movie Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar, and for me, you know, this was a revelation. He was a non-violent revolutionary, a man of peace, love, and he was Jewish. I always figured he was Catholic. And so with that, I realized that maybe I had prejudged Jesus based on the experiences my mother had experienced, my father had experienced, a lot of anti-Semitism, and here was a Jewish Messiah. And the more I read, the more I was impressed, and eventually I realized that he was Lord and Messiah, and I needed to make a decision to either serve him or go my own way. Actually be opposed to him.
Well, you've been in Chicago for a good number of years. What brought you to the city?
Well, I came to faith and began. I came to faith, actually went back to New York. Started back in. I was a student, dropped out of school because I wanted to be a lawyer to change the world. But now I knew the only way the world would be changed was through Jesus. And so I began working, and on my days off, I would work on the college campus sharing the gospel. And while doing that, I ran across a missionary with Chosen People Ministries who challenged me to consider becoming a missionary with them. I said, you could get paid to do this?
Yeah.
And they said, well, if you're qualified, yeah. And so they actually hired me to share the gospel, and I did that in upstate. And then they said, we want you to go to Chicago to Moody Bible Institute to get your training, theological training. And so I did that, and that's how I came to Chicago and wound up planting 3 congregations in the area, and working for a season at Moody Church on the staff there as pastor of evangelism, and just working with Erwin Lutzer, and it's been a wonderful experience being in Chicago. But now I'm actually planting a work in downtown Chicago in conjunction with Moody Church called Beth Sar Shalom.
Oh, okay. Now, when you were at the Moody Bible Institute, and that would be, what, a few decades ago, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
But even then, didn't they have a major in Jewish studies?
Yes, they did. At the time, Louis Goldberg was the head of the department, Jewish believer, and that was followed by Michael Rydelnik, who is currently the head of the Jewish Studies department.
So did it seem a bit unusual to come to Chicago and find yourself in the midst of Jewish studies at the Moody? I mean, it seems like it was a very different world from the one you'd known.
Well, I mean, I had become a Christian and learned to understand what the Bible was about in the New Testament, that God really did love Gentiles. Much to my chagrin, and that, you know, that I was called to be a part of the church, and at the same time communicate to the church the Jewish roots of their faith, kind of being an emissary of the Jewish people and of our background, the holy days, and what they mean to us as Christians.
Yeah.
So what I needed, though, was credentials. And training in correct theology, and Moody was one of the best schools in the country. Yeah. And it didn't hurt that it was tuition free. Yeah. Or paid, I should say.
Right, tuition paid, right. Yeah. Well, you went on to do some other very interesting things. We're going to talk more about that in just a moment. And we are going to take a short break and then continue our discussion with Roy Schwarcz. And he is the Midwest Regional Director for an organization known as Chosen People Ministries. We'll continue our discussion with Roy in just a moment.
God is our safe place and our strength. He is always our help when we are in trouble. This word of God in Psalm 46:1 says it all. God is our safe place. He is our strength. He is our help when we are in trouble. Whenever and wherever we are invited, nationally or internationally, Lutheran Church Charity's mission is to bring the mercy, compassion, presence, and proclamation of Jesus Christ to those who are suffering and in need. LCC is a ministry of presence, to be present with Jesus, to lift up people in times of joy and sorrow, in prayer, and by passing through donations of dollar per dollar to those in need. Through our canine ministries, we respond and deploy with boots on the ground and paws within 24 hours, often sooner, of any crisis or disaster situation we're invited into. You see, for us, the bottom line is making a difference by being present. for people who are suffering and in need with that mercy, compassion, presence of Jesus Christ. Thank you again for allowing us the privilege to stand alongside and serve others. Jesus and your partnership make that possible to touch thousands of lives.
This is Moving People Forward. I'm Mark Elfstrand, and we're discussing how a nice Jewish boy from New York came to Chicago, now shares Jesus. My guest is Roy Schwarcz, who's the Midwest Regional Director for Chosen People Ministries. Okay, so you know that you had this perception of what Christians were like. We know that that has gone through a revolutionary change, but we know that that term still carries baggage in the Jewish community today. How do you deal with that?
Well, by helping Jewish people understand that Christianity is Jewish, helping them to realize that there's a connection, that it's not a new religion, that in fact without our foundation of Torah, the prophets, and the writings, Christianity is unfounded. But because it is founded upon our fathers and upon the teachings of the Torah and the prophets, this is a Jewish faith. And so it's not antithetical to what we are as Jews. Okay,
so if I was Jewish and then I'm hearing you tell this, and this is like shaking my world up and going, wow, this is going to cost me. It's going to cost me in my relationships with my family. And then actually, Roy, I feel like I'm going to have to give up my Jewishness. Respond to those two issues.
Well, one of the reasons we exist as Chosen People Ministries is to help Jewish people realize that this is a Jewish faith and to bring them into an atmosphere that's Jewish. So we have Bible studies that go through Genesis that I lead in Highland Park, and Exodus actually is where I am now. Downtown at Moody Church, we have studies in Genesis and also a Messianic worship service on the first Friday of the month. And so we create Jewish space. We celebrate the Jewish holy days, Passover, first fruits, unleavened bread, Shavuot, or as it's known in the church, Pentecost, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. We did all these things at Moody Church and also in congregations that I planted, so that, you know, we celebrate these gatherings. And we don't charge for our services, so people can come and see that, that we're very Jewish.
Okay, but now come back to I'm going to tell my family, and my family is going to disown me. Did that happen with you?
No, they were just relieved I wasn't in drugs.
You see? So they could accept the religious thing. Huh?
Well, they accepted it. You know, this is a phase he's going through. This will pass. And then when they saw my children, you know, as normal and very Jewish and yet, you know, loving God and not Meshuggahs, their neighbors, and you know, all the horror stories that other family friends had, they were actually very grateful.
Yeah. But what about those people that do go back and their families essentially do disown them?
Well, it's hard. Well, there's a cost to following Jesus. I mean, there always has been a cost, and so, you know, we're called to take up our cross, and that means losing friends and families. I mean, I shared the gospel with my fraternity brothers when I came to faith, and they wanted nothing to do with me. And one of my very good friends, when he discovered what I was doing, he called me every name in the book and wanted nothing. I mean, we grew up together. Wanted nothing to do with me. So I mean, it comes with the territory.
But is it a rejection of Jesus, or is it a rejection of something else?
Well, it's not really a rejection of Jesus, because they don't know Jesus. You know, the Jesus that I've come to know is the God of Israel, is something very Jewish. But they look at churchianity and they say that, you know, you become part of those Catholics that have persecuted people, or homosexuals, you know, child perversion, and all the religious excesses and hypocrisy of Christianity that we love to focus on as Jewish people, to show that it can't be for us. And so it's not Jesus we reject. I mean, if we looked at Jesus, which is why I said when I read Paradise Lost, when I saw Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar, I mean, these are not Christian movies, but they were Jewish, and
Right.
and they portrayed a Jewish Messiah. When I saw those, I didn't see anything different than the hypocrisy within the church today. I mean, you know, Jesus said that the Pharisees sat in the seat of Moses. Listen to what they say. So he endorsed their theology. He just said, but don't do what they do.
Yeah.
And I suppose if Jesus came today, he would say the same thing about evangelicals or fundamentalists who you know are very sound theologically in many ways, but are in some ways hypocritical. And so, I mean, there's nothing new. Jesus wants us to have a relationship with him and to love him with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And so that's a very difficult thing. And that's what we're called to do.
A while back, several years ago, you wrote a book called Where Jesus Walked. So tell me about that.
Well, right now it's out of print, but I'm getting it reprinted.
Okay.
And but it's available in Kindle format. It's an explanation of how old and new covenants fit together. We go through the life of Jesus and show how the Old Testament foreshadowed about 55 different sections of the New Testament, and how the Old Testament prophesied it, how it looked like in the first century, and how it connects to us today as believers. And so it's kind of a helpful book for Christians to understand that Jesus made them kosher.
Okay, so you say you can order it though via Kindle. Huh?
Right.
Yeah, Where Jesus Walked. Okay, another thing that you enjoy doing is taking groups to Israel. I've heard a former president of a Bible college, somebody you and I would both know, say that it's God's will for you to go to Israel. He's not Jewish, but he believes that. But why is that so important?
Well, I think it helps Christians to see the context of what went on at the time of Jesus. And not only that, but the Old Testament. It helps us see prophecy come to light. It reinforces the Bible in so many ways. And when you read the Bible, someone has said, it's kind of looking at it from now on in a third dimension, because you see where these things happen and events, and it gives you just a better idea of what's going on.
So you do these tours yourself, right? And so how would people find out about those?
Well, they could contact me at rschwartz@chosenpeople.com.
Okay, we'll try to get that up on our screen
That'd be
here
great.
for people as well. Another thing that you do is Seder presentations.
I do.
And for those who are unfamiliar with the term, or why, as people who are not Jewish, why would they go to one of these?
Well, it helps to understand the context of communion. Jesus instituted what we call communion, the Lord's Supper, at a Passover. And, you know, the context of the Passover is to remember how God delivered us from bondage and slavery and from many trials, and that he commanded us to remember this day. And so the context of communion is Passover. And without that context, much of what is expressed in communion is lost. And so as Christians, knowing the connection between old and new gives, again, another dimension to our communion, helps us to put it in context. And moreover, one of the reasons that God says in his word that he brought the gospel to Gentiles is to provoke us Jews to jealousy. And as Christians understand that communion is a Passover, and we share that with Jewish people, that provokes them in some ways to jealousy.
All right, so the name of the ministry is Chosen People Ministries. How do you view the Jews as chosen people today?
Well, you know, as Jews, we say, if it's really true we're the chosen people, God, could you please choose someone else?
Right.
This is what it means to be chosen. Who needs it?
Right.
But you know, what it means is that to be chosen means to be what God called us to be, a priest to the nations,
Right.
and to be his holy people. And we have an incomplete portfolio. We have a zeal for God, but we don't know God. And so whatever our God is, whether it be finance, medicine, science, you name it, law, we're zealous for it, and we're good at it, we excel at it. Broadway, you know, movies.
Right.
So we need God. We need Jesus. And so to be chosen is to be called to be priests, his firstborn. Those who were the firstborn were initially the priests of Israel, and called to be priests to the nation. Israel is my son, God said, my firstborn among the nations. And as his firstborn sons, we are called to be ministers. And so That's why we need the gospel. Without us being evangelized and shared with, we're not doing what God called us to do, and hence we're not blessing the nations as God called us to bless the nations.
Aside from Yeshua, do you have any Bible heroes, Jewish heroes that really you say, you know, I just love this person?
Well, you know, Samuel is one of mine, but you know, what I love about all the characters in the scriptures, Jewish and also new, is they're like us. Yeah. They're broken. They are heroes. Probably Daniel and Nehemiah are my two favorites because of their acknowledgement not only of their own sin, but of the sins of the people, and were humble and broken. And just went about God's work in God's way.
All right. Well, if people would like more information about Chosen People Ministries, what's the website that they could connect with?
ChosenPeople.com.
Okay.
And we have Isaiah53.com. This chapter can change your life. So if you know somebody Jewish, most Jews are not familiar with Isaiah 53. If you read that to them, they'll say, well, where in the New Testament is that? It's, you know, you're reading from the New Testament, right? And no, this is from the Jewish prophet Isaiah, 700 years BC. And so Isaiah53.com. And then we have various Jewish testimonies at ifoundshalom.com. Okay. So those are some websites that are outreach oriented and helpful. And then I have a website with Bible studies from a Jewish perspective at royschwartz.org.
Okay. Roy, it's been a delight seeing you again.
Thank you.
And catching up with you. And
always good to see you, Mark.
May God continue to just bless the kingdom work that you do with such passion. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And that is going to do it for our program today. As the sages have told us, grow in wisdom, think humbly of yourself, and love one another. And may it be so with you. Join me next time for more of Moving People Forward. I'm Mark Elfstrand.